September 1st, 1943. Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's hand paused over the intelligence report. His one good eye, the other lost to American gunners a year earlier, scanning words that made him laugh out loud in the humid operations tent. The Americans have produced a new fighter, heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport. They call it Hellcat. Our intelligence suggests it weighs twice our Zero. Another American failure of design? Through the tent flaps, he could see his squadron's A6M Zero lined up on the pierced steel planking, sleek, nimble, deadly. For 2 years, these aircraft had dominated Pacific skies. British Hurricanes, American P-40s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all had fallen before the Zero's guns. The Americans' latest attempt, this bloated Hellcat, would be no different. What Sakai didn't know, what none of the Japanese naval aviators gathering for their morning briefing knew, was that in exactly 30 days, this failure would begin the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would achieve a kill ratio of 19-to-1, destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft while losing only 270 in aerial combat. It would transform carrier warfare, break the back of Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign of terror had been built on a foundation of fatal assumptions. The mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be rewritten by an aircraft that looked wrong, flew heavy, and seemed to violate every principle the Japanese had perfected. Yet within 6 months, the very pilots now laughing at intelligence reports would be writing final letters home, knowing that encountering Hellcats meant statistical certainty of death. The rising sun's zenith. The Japanese Navy's confidence in September 1943 wasn't arrogance, it was mathematics. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved victory ratios that defied belief. At Pearl Harbor, they lost 29 aircraft while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses against 103 destroyed. Over Darwin, 2 losses versus 30. The British Far East Fleet's air arm annihilated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force eliminated in days. At the center of this dominance flew the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, an aircraft that had rewritten the rules of fighter design. When captured examples were tested by American engineers in 1942, they initially refused to believe the performance figures: a fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower to destroy anything it caught. It seemed impossible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would become Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills, described the Zero in his recovered diary. Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control input. American planes fly like trucks. Powerful but clumsy, they build fighters like they build cars. Heavy, overbuilt, wasteful. The Zero achieved its miraculous performance through revolutionary design philosophy. Extra Super Duralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, created a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. No armor plate protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks added weight. Even the radio was often removed to save 30. Every ounce sacrificed for performance. The intelligence dismissal. The first reports of the F6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications seemed like propaganda or perhaps deliberate misinformation. The aircraft weighed 12,186 kilograms loaded. The Zero weighed 5,800. Its wing area spanned 334 square feet with a draggy radial engine. It carried 2 400 rounds of ammunition, armor plate everywhere, bulletproof glass, self-sealing tanks holding 250 kilograms of fuel. Captain Minoru. Gender, the tactical genius who had planned Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His analysis preserved in the Japanese Defense Archives was dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy. Attempting to overcome pilot skill with weight of machinery, a Zero will fly circles around it. The mathematics seem to support his assessment. The Zero's wing loading of 2022 meters per square ft gave it a turning radius of 6 and 12 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 meters per square foot suggested a turning radius over 900 feet. In a turning fight, the basis of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would be helpless. The first glimpse, September 30th, 1943, Marcus Island. Petty Officer. First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them. 6 dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His first thought recorded in his after-action report. B-25 bombers on a strange heading, then they turned and he saw the distinctive silhouette. Single engine, massive fuselage, wings that seemed too short for the body. First encounter with F6F Hellcat fighter. He would write, initial impression. Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber, engaged with standard tactics. Standard tactics meant using the Zero's superior turn rate to get on the enemy's tail. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to curve onto its 600 position. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The Hellcat didn't run. It didn't try to turn with him. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R28000 double Wasp engine producing 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakai's 130 horsepower, drove the Hellcat upward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, attempting to follow, watched his airspeed decay as the Zero struggled against gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for its weight. A hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 m. Fukui reported, 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui survived, barely making it back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer Secondas Masao, didn't return. Neither did the reconnaissance plane they were escorting. First blood to the Hellcat. The weight paradox. October 5th, 1943. Task Force 14 struck Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another nuisance raid. American carriers had been launching these hit-and-run attacks for months, usually fleeing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This time would be different. We climbed to 20,000 feet. Shiga recorded in his diary, below us, 12 F6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every advantage, altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain. The engagement that followed shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters didn't scatter or attempt to turn. They maintained formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy high. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat's armor included 212 thumps of plate protecting the pilot, 110 sumps around the oil system, self-sealing tanks that could take dozens of hits. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in diving passes, the Hellcats executed their counterattack. Instead of turning to dogfight, they used their weight as a weapon. Climbing at full power, they reached altitude where the Zero's engine struggled for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,050 horsepower. The Zero was down to 900. They came down on us like hawks on sparrows. Shiga wrote, their weight gave them speed we couldn't match. They would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react. 8 Zeros were shot down. No Hellcats were lost. The Marianas Turkey Shoot Prophecy. November 11th, 1943, Rabaul. The assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened as Lieutenant Commander Taiyo Tanamizu briefed them on American tactics. Tanamizu, with 32 victories, was one of the few pilots who had survived multiple encounters with Hellcats. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he told them. "The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors." Tanamizu explained what Japanese pilots were slowly, fatally learning. The Hellcat wasn't designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to. Using a combat doctrine called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy to kinetic energy in slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no chance to use their superior maneuverability. "They work in pairs," Tanamizu continued. "One high, one low. While you engage one, the other is already diving on you. Their radios, which we laughed at for adding weight, let them coordinate perfectly. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a machine. The technology gulf." December 1943, TR Lagoon. Commander Mitsuo Fuida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, now served as Air Operations Officer for the combined fleet. His inspection of damaged Zeros returning from encounters with Hellcats revealed the growing technology gap. The disparity in firepower was mathematical. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 machine guns fired 750 rounds per minute each, 500 rounds per minute total. Each 50 caliber bullet weighed 46 and traveled at 2 to 900 feet SARS, delivering 3,500 feet lb of energy. The Zero's 27.7 mm machine guns fired projectiles weighing 11 grm at 300 feet per 750 feet lb of energy. More disturbing were the reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots still relied on eyesight to spot enemies, Hellcat pilots were guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could see Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. Lieutenant Sadamu Kumachi described his first radar-directed interception. "We were climbing through clouds when they hit us. No warning, no visual contact. Hellcats diving from above, exactly on our heading, perfectly positioned. They knew where we were, our altitude, our course. We were blind men fighting those who could see in the dark." The pilot equation, January 1944. The Japanese pilot crisis was becoming catastrophic. The pre-war Imperial Navy pilot training program had been the world's most demanding. Training took 3 years with pilots entering combat with 700 flight hours. Army pilots received 500 hours minimum. They were artists of aerial combat trained in aerobatics, gunnery, and the spiritual philosophy of air fighting. By early 1944, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with 300 hours of flight time. Army pilots with 200. Fuel shortages meant most training was done in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, instrument flight, radio procedures, all eliminated to rush pilots to the front. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with 300 hours minimum, including 50 hours in type. They had fired thousands of practice rounds, practiced carrier landings until they were automatic, learned energy tactics in safety over Texas airfields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasumigara Naval Air Station, wrote in his final report, "We are sending children to fight professionals." Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. "We have no ammunition for practice." He had never flown at night. "We have no fuel for such training." He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat. The Formosa Revelation, October 12th to 16th, 1944. The Battle of Formosa. Vice Admiral Shagaru Fukuome, commander of the 2nd Air Fleet, committed everything to stop the American carrier raids on Formosa. Over 700 aircraft, including the last trained pilots from the homeland training squadrons. The Japanese claimed spectacular victory. 26 carriers and battleships sunk, 300 aircraft destroyed. The reality discovered only after pilots returned and gun camera footage was developed was catastrophic. Actual American losses, 89 aircraft. Japanese losses, 329 aircraft and almost every experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few surviving veterans, described the slaughter in his memoirs. The Hellcats were waiting at every altitude. As we climbed, they were above us. As we dove, they were below. They had divided the sky into grids, each section covered by a division. It was not combat. It was systematic extermination. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea. The Japanese Navy committed its reconstituted carrier force to Operation Ago, the decisive battle that would destroy American carrier power in the Pacific. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots, against them. Task Force 58, with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft. 450 of them F6F Hellcats. Admiral Saburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 waves, confident that Japanese pilot skill and the Zero's range advantage would prevail. The first wave of 69 aircraft launched at Ozawa 30. American radar detected them at 150 mi. Hellcats were vetoed for interception with perfect positioning, altitude advantage, sun at their backs, approaching from the Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Arbe, leading the fighter escort, saw the Hellcats minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, CAG of Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft in that single day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, got 6. The Zeros tried to turn with us, McCampbell reported. We simply refused. We'd make a high side run, shoot one down, zoom climb back to altitude. They'd try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off. By day's end, the Japanese had lost 346 carrier aircraft, plus 50 land-based aircraft. American losses: 30 aircraft from all causes. American pilots in their ready rooms that evening coined the term turkey shoot. The enemy aircraft had been as helpless as game birds. The Lee Gulf record, October 24, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. Commander David McCampbell would set his single mission record during this battle, leading 7 Hellcats from Essex. He intercepted a force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading for the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute battle, McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros, and 4 bombers, while his wingman, Roy Rushing, destroyed 6 more. I ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill, McCampbell recorded. The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout, not a single hit on my aircraft despite being outnumbered 8-1. This engagement demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without loss. McCampbell's 2 ace-in-a-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him the Medal of Honor and Navy Cross. The psychological collapse. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles produced what Japanese military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis among surviving pilots. Admiral Ozawa, in his after-action report, wrote, "The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we thought impossible: the industrialization of air-to combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter but a component in a vast machine. Our pilots, no matter how skilled, were engaging not planes but a system. The pilot shortage became so acute that by early 1945, training was reduced to 40 to 50 hours for Navy pilots, 60 to 70 hours for Army pilots. Kamikaze pilots received only 40 to 50 hours total, approximately 7 days of training." The Okinawa Apocalypse, April to June 1945. Operation Iceberg. The Japanese launched 900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet off Okinawa. The Hellcat became not just a fighter, but a defender against the desperation of suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his Flying Circus division of Hellcats, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. His tactical innovations using divisions of 4 aircraft in coordinated attacks made traditional Japanese tactics suicidal. "We developed what we called the mowing machine," Valencia explained. Four Hellcats in line of breast, separated by 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his sector. We'd make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were stark. Hellcats flew 38-038 combat sorties, claiming 351 victories against 249 losses, a 9.51 ratio. More significantly, they prevented approximately 80% of kamikaze aircraft from reaching their targets. The technology chasm. By 1945, the technological gap had become unbridgeable. The F6F Hellcat incorporated improvements that made it even deadlier. Water injection boosting power to 2,200 horsepower, zero-length rocket launchers, improved armor, and the K-14 computing gun sight that calculated deflection automatically. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 28 official victories, though modern historians estimate closer to 15 encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his skill and experience, he was nearly killed in his first engagement. "I performed my best aerobatics," he wrote in his autobiography. "Loops, rolls, splits, every maneuver I had perfected over 200 combats. The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. I survived only because the American pilot made an error. He forgot to release his drop tank before combat, the human cost accounting. By war's end, the F6F Hellcat had destroyed 223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, lost 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, achieved a 19.321 kill ratio, produced 305 U.S. Navy aces, accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost for Japan was catastrophic. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had started the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. The kamikaze equation. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite force to kamikaze operations represented the ultimate admission of the Hellcat superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan turned its pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, justified it with stark mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, probability of success is near zero. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the Zero becomes a bomb, probability of hitting increases to 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death has meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishiyawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories. 2 F6F Hellcats in the process. The next day, October 26, 1944, Nishiyawa died as a passenger aboard a transport shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's greatest ace, helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had briefly bested. The final testimony. August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast. At Atsugi Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, who had dismissed the Hellcat as weight over finesse, listened to the Emperor's words. Around him sat the remnants of Japanese naval aviation, teenage pilots with 40 hours of flight time, aircraft cobbled together from spare parts, empty fuel tanks. That same day, Enon Clarence Moore of VF-31, flying from USS Bellewood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber after 200 p.m. The last aerial victory of World War II, the Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific Air War. The occupation revelation. September 1945, Atsugi Airfield. The first American aircraft to land after the surrender were 12 F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway to see their tormentor up close. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Vasu, ace with 19 victories, demonstrated the Hellcat's capabilities to Japanese pilots. His casual aerobatics, Loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart left them speechless. "You have to understand," Vatu told them through an interpreter. "This isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. The plane is stressed for 13 Gs. I've never managed to break one." The engineering postmortem. Japanese engineers studying captured Hellcats after the war discovered the true extent of American industrial superiority. The Pratt & Whitney R28000 engine contained 284 precision-machined parts, each interchangeable with any other R28000 engine. The Nakajima Sakai required hand-fitting of components. No two engines were exactly alike. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat extensively after the war. His conclusion was devastating. "We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age. The production miracle." German's production of the Hellcat itself became a weapon. The Bethpage, New York factory operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company produced 275 Hellcats in 30 months, a feat the Japanese couldn't comprehend. In 1944, Japan produced 5 100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 fighters that year alone. The production system included innovations that seemed impossible to Japanese observers. Workers using color-coded instructions to assemble complex components. Shifts operating around the clock. Quality maintaining despite speed. The strategic revolution. The Hellcat didn't just win battles. It revolutionized naval warfare. Pre-war doctrine assumed carriers were vulnerable platforms that needed to strike first to survive. The Hellcat inverted this. Carriers became fortresses that could absorb and repel any air attack. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, understood this transformation. With the Hellcat, we don't need to find them first. Let them come. The F6F will destroy them at our convenience. This confidence allowed unprecedented offensive operations. American carriers could park off enemy coastlines for weeks, their Hellcat umbrellas making them essentially invulnerable to air attack. The cultural collision. Beyond technology, the Hellcat represented a cultural philosophy that invalidated Japanese military doctrine. The samurai tradition emphasized individual excellence, spiritual strength, and acceptance of death. The Hellcat embodied systematic efficiency, material superiority, and preservation of life. This philosophical gulf meant Japanese pilots couldn't adapt to Hellcat tactics even when they understood them. The concept of refusing combat when disadvantaged, fundamental to Hellcat doctrine, was literally unthinkable to Japanese pilots trained in Bushido. The judgment of history. In 1962, the United States Navy held a symposium on Pacific War aviation. American and Japanese veterans gathered to discuss the conflict with historical perspective. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces with 34 victories, stated simply, "The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War, period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made our victory inevitable." Commander Saburo Sakai responded, "The Zero was a superior fighter. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood the difference until too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost. The ultimate reckoning." The Hellcat's dominance can be reduced to simple mathematics that tell a profound story. Kill ratio 19, 1 overall. 13, 1, specifically against Zeros. Hellcats produced 12,275 in 30 months. Zeros produced 1943 to 1945, approximately 6,000 American pilots trained on Hellcats, over 5,000. Japanese pilots remaining by August 1945, fewer than 100 combat-capable. Admiral Saburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at Philippine Sea, provided perhaps the most honest assessment. "We laughed at the Hellcat because we didn't understand it represented not just an aircraft, but an entire civilization's approach to war. By the time we stopped laughing, our air forces had ceased to exist." The last word, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, lived until 2000. In his final interview, he was asked about the Hellcat. His response captured the totality of its dominance. The Zero made Japan a great naval power. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons facing the future. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That is the ultimate defeat. Existing at your enemy's discretion. The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed. Carrying armor the Zero didn't have. Powered by an engine the Japanese couldn't build. Armed with weapons they couldn't match. Guided by radars they couldn't detect. Flown by pilots they couldn't equal in training, and produced in numbers they couldn't comprehend. Japanese pilots had laughed at it because they didn't understand that every extra pound represented not weakness but the strength of an industrial democracy that could afford to protect its warriors. By the time they understood, their laughter had turned to last letters home, their mockery to kamikaze missions, their confidence to complete collapse. The Hellcat hadn't just defeated the Zeros. It had destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare, proving that in modern combat, the nation that could build the better system would destroy the nation that could only build better warriors. The Japanese pilots had laughed at the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did.